Hello, ma'am.
And sir, before you take your seat, please raise your right hand, right close and swear your name. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, be seated.
Good afternoon.
How you doing?
Could you please state your name and spell it for the record?
Sure. My name's Lon Bartel, L-O-N-B-A-R-T-E-L.
And can you please tell us a little bit about where you are currently employed?
Sure. One of the roles that I have is I work for a company that builds training simulators for the U.S. military and law enforcement, where I'm the director of training and curriculum as well as the principal researcher for developing that very high fidelity training material, which includes the utilization of force options, de-escalation, less lethal utilization, as well as our system has been used widely for research on human performance.
And what aspects of your role there involve applying principles from sport and exercise science? And how it informs understanding physical exertion?
Sure.
And what that is?
So force on force can kind of go down two different paths. One of them is what we refer to in law enforcement as force on force or man marking rounds. That particular technology I teach for that company on the side. They're the largest manufacturer of this particular technology. They take real guns and they modify them. They put in a new barrel and different magazines, and then the ammunition that they use fires a small paint pellet so that it will actually show where the round hits. And if I give 3 different people different colors, I know how to keep you accountable for your rounds or your rounds. But the weapon cycles the way a real firearm does, and one of the other components to it is because those little paint pellets are moving at a pretty good speed, they hurt. And because of that, what that creates is an elevated arousal state, which is highly beneficial in law enforcement training, because we need to get officers to be able to adjust and make those type of, or deal with those type of environments. So it's one of the ways that we can elevate the arousal level or the stress level and force them to have to perform whatever the tasks are. Now, we don't necessarily always use the tool. They just need to know that it's a possibility. Often those drills are nothing more than a de-escalation drill. But I don't want you to know that ahead of time. I need you to not know that. It's an important consideration. So another form of force on force or simulation training is the stuff I build with the digital simulators. Those simulators, imagine a large movie screen. One of the systems we have is actually 5 large screens. It's projected in 4K. And it's not a movie as we think of it as a linear event. In other words, you hit play and it just finishes however it finishes. The particular technology has a branching component to it, and many of us grew up reading books called Choose Your Own Adventure books, where you would read the book and you got to a specific point, there were decisions you could make. You would go to a different page, and then there's a completely different storyline. Well, our video does that, and the instructor can click or branch the video. So if you're doing a great job on giving verbal commands, I can make it so that the individuals on screen comply to your commands. Or if maybe I need you to say things slightly different and I don't reward it so that they're more, more confrontational. But you also have in the devices that we use a laser insert, and that laser insert goes into a firearm, a taser, OC spray, less lethal munitions, so that my actions can immediately branch that video as well. So if I have a subject that pulls a gun, I can utilize a firearm and shoot them, and that individual may drop to the ground, or if I don't hit them in a vital spot, they may only stagger and then re-engage, and then the officer has to deal with the fact that that lethal tool or a less lethal tool wasn't effective, and they have to continue on making decisions and interacting with the video. We also use a device called a threat fire, which is a small electric device that creates a little pain signal. Because again, I need that arousal level to be brought up to be representative of the environments that law enforcement or our military really face.
And why is that important?
So that elevation in the arousal level, it changes your body chemistry and your brain chemistry. And I need you to be able to make the adjustments accordingly, whether it's emotional self-regulation or to realize that, you know, you're being overcome in this circumstance, you don't have the right skills, you don't have enough people, whatever else happens to be. I need to create those dynamics because it's an important consideration.
Have you ever been involved in developing or reviewing training curriculum for law enforcement?
I have.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so goes back to the statement I made about IATLS as far as developing their material, as well as at my agency, I developed all of our material. As my role with the Arizona Tactical Officers Association, I would volunteer to work with smaller agencies and their tactical teams to help them develop their policies and procedures and make adjustments based on the limitations that they had on personnel, equipment, and training time, so that way they were able to get the safest environments possible based on what they had.
And what are some of the factors that you consider when doing this for agencies, when
So
creating?
big things that you have to look at is, number one, is state and federal law. I mean, those are our guiding factors. What is it that an officer legally has to be able to obtain, be able to adhere to? Another is department policy, because policy is going to dictate what an officer's standard is held to. And just as important, and comes from my education, my training background, is it humanly possible what we're asking these individuals to actually do? The capability of a human being, and we're all flawed human beings, has to be looked at, because there are some things that you just may not be able to do. And that is not a fair standard to hold somebody to. Or if you want to hold them to a high standard, you've got to be able to make sure that you're giving them the training, not only the amount, but the type of training done in the right methodological way to support that level of performance that you're expecting from them.
And based on the, I guess, kind of tying in the human performance to some of the use of force, what are some of the, how does exertion or exhaustion play into use of force policies?
Can you approach briefly?
Do you have any peer-reviewed, published research
I do.
that ties into law enforcement performance and how that relationship to exercise science plays into each other?
I do.
Can you explain some of the, are any of those peer-reviewed and published research, is that related to use of force or deadly force encounters?
All of it.
Okay, and part of that, have you researched kind of the, specifically the transition from taser to firearms and how long that takes?
Yeah, I did a published research specifically on how long it takes an officer to transition in a simulated environment from firearm to taser, as well as taser to firearm.
And have you presented at any international law enforcement training conferences or any conferences generally about exercise and sports science?
As the principles apply to law enforcement, yes.
And Your Honor, at this time, I would have moved to qualify Mr. Bartel as an expert in exercise and sports science and exertion and exhaustion factors.
Like the voir dire, Your Honor?
I'm sorry, you said an exertion, I'm trying to write down what you're saying.
Exertion and exhaustion factors.
All right, and yes, you may voir dire.
Since that was got a report from you, it's basically on fatigue. Would that be a fair kind of summary of what your report on this matter is regarding?
Exertion and exhaustion, probably.
Exertion, exhaustion, okay. But the peer-reviewed things you just mentioned is use of force and deadly force for how to transition from a gun to a taser.
That's one of them, yes.
It's one of them. But you have no published things on exercise science, peer-reviewed.
Actually, all of the principles in exercise science are going to be specific to the law enforcement component.
But
When-
that's a whole different thing, though. This is your law enforcement component. You're saying that exercise science, you're talking about fatigue, people getting tired. You have no studies, you have no published articles on that aspect of it.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I'm focusing on, because that's what you're testifying to this jury. You've never done your own research in this area. Your report has none of your own research, correct?
Correct.
Okay. You're relying on other people's research for this report.
Correct.
So when you're looking at what an expert does, you've never published anything in regards to this area?
In regards to
Peer review.
specific exhaustion, no.
Exercise, that's what you're an
But
expert in.
exercise and sports science, absolutely.
Where? I mean, I got a list of your things, there's, you know.
Let's talk about the one that you just mentioned, which is the transition study. So the transition study is going to include a component of action and perception. So as human beings see the environment, we pay attention to different things. We have to process all of that, and then we make a decision. That decision then just has to be carried out. That is legitimately a component of exercise and sports science. That's an example. Another one would be the study that I did on time to stop. So we created an environment where officers had firearms, they were given a signal to start shooting, and they were given a signal to stop shooting. The action of stopping required them to be able to see what was going on, to formulate a plan, and then carry out that plan. Exercise in sports science is not just about how much oxygen I need, it's also about how I see the environment, perceive the environment, make the decisions, and then carry out those decisions, which is what the majority of my research has been.
But in terms of what, that's not what your report's about. It's not, your report for this incident was about how people are impacted by fatigue and how tired people get, essentially. Is that a fair assessment?
How exhaustion can play into
Sure.
their performance,
How exhaustion played into performance in this specific instance.
or any instance similar to it.
And in terms of you're still working on you're working on your doctorate. You haven't presented a thesis to defend, have you?
No, first defense is in 2 weeks.
2 weeks, so you still haven't gone through that process.
Correct.
You haven't done any books in this area?
No.
And one of the things you work with, the one certification, you listed a number of certifications. The only two I have that, in the National Academy of Sports Medicine was 2021, correct?
Correct.
And National Strength and Conditioning Association is in 2023, correct?
Correct.
The rest of them, in terms of any sort of exercise, sports medicine, I don't see anything other than those two on your CV.
Correct. Those are the two that I maintain. It gets expensive to maintain all the other ones.
Sure, but you listed a whole bunch of them, but those have all expired.
Correct.
Those were when you were doing exercise, I think you said you were a trainer?
Health fitness instructor, personal trainer, and strength coach.
And that was back in 1997?
Correct.
And that was
That's where it
before you,
started.
so all those certifications and stuff were back in 1997, before you became a police officer?
Correct.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
There's a motion to have him recognized as an expert in the fields of exercise and sports science and exertion and exhaustion factors. Is there an objection to that or not?
I guess it goes to weight, not admissibility, Your Honor, so leave it to your discretion.
All right, so I will have, for purposes of this case, I will accept him as an expert in those areas.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Bartel, did you form an opinion in this case?
I did.
And what is your opinion?
My opinion is that the video captures from the different angles show that Officer Schurr was engaged in a prolonged, very intense fight where he attempted to control a very resistive subject. He utilized multiple control options, such as knee strikes and punches, to try to prevent this individual from getting away and then from taking his deadly, dangerous instrument from him. The individual seems unfazed by the vast majority of his force options, to a point where he even was able to push up off the ground with Chris on his back. The struggle continues, where you can see Chris and you can hear his labored breathing, indicative of exertion and exhaustion. Towards the end of the fight, where he is now fighting over the control of his taser and eventually loses control of this dangerous weapon and deadly weapon, and is then at a point where he's exhausted and has very little options other than the use of deadly force to stop the ongoing assault.
So breaking that down a little bit, have you, I guess we'll kind of maybe work backwards and then come back to it. But have you formed an opinion about, I guess, whether it would be reasonable for an officer in Officer Schurr's position to be in fear of serious bodily injury or death after all of the factors you just listed?
Yes.
Why?
When we start getting tired because of high levels of physical exhaustion, and most of us understand this at some level, your ability to continue that effort goes away quickly. You know, the idea that we're able to fight for an extended period of time is not realistic. And what happens is we quickly lose the ability to maintain muscular strength or muscular power, which is absolutely vital in these type of situations. So as our ability to maintain, or think of it this way, produce force with our muscles starts to decrease, our ability to hold on, our ability to control somebody, our ability to hit somebody effectively is diminished rapidly, meaning we no longer are able to effectively fight. This individual can overcome us, they can take things away from us, and those things can then be used against us, which creates a very, very difficult position.
And kind of breaking all of this down a little bit, let's kind of go through an overview of how physical exhaustion comes up during stressful encounters generally, just to kind of walk through some of that. So based on your experience and training, how does a high-intensity exertion affect the human body during stressful encounters?
So understand that our body loves to be in a position or a condition called homeostasis, which is kind of how we're all sitting right here. If I do anything that gets us out of homeostasis, out of that balance, I have to do stuff, my body has to engage in stuff to get it back. So if I try to hit somebody really, really hard, I exert a lot of energy. That exertion changes things in the body. I start using chemicals up, I use fuel, right? So everything from, there's different types of fuel. Most of us understand that we use sugar and we use fat as a fuel source, and we do, you know, you need oxygen for long distance stuff, but short distance, high intensity, we don't use a lot of oxygen. We're using more blood sugar or another substance in the body. But when we engage in those behaviors, we start using up those stores. So that fuel starts to go away. And what happens when we burn it or burn it off is we have all these byproducts. And these byproducts, and most of us have felt it, like if I had to do a bunch of push-ups, you know, that burning sensation that you start to get, or a bunch of sit-ups, that's some of those byproducts that start to get built up, and you quickly start seeing your fatigue. Your muscles start to shake or tremor, and you're unable to generate the same amount of force on the 20th one that you did on the first one. So there's a level that we really understand what happens when we go through these high levels of physical exertion. And I'm just talking about 20, 25 push-ups. I'm not talking about a fight that lasted for 2 minutes and 30 seconds while wearing extra weight of the bulletproof vest and the belt on top of it. Those are all things that would lead into the exertional component to this, and how, as we start to get tired, our ability to control somebody goes away quickly.
And can you explain a little bit more about why that is?
Well, I mentioned the burning of the fuel sources start to go away, the byproducts that start to happen, and without getting too into it, the fatigue can hit two different ways. One can be central, which is the nervous system, because it's being utilized in these high intensity situations, and the other is a peripheral, or within the muscles itself. So because we're using both of those at high intensity, we start seeing those fatigue factors start to set in. Those exertional aspects cause all these changes that occur from a neurological and a physiological component that makes it that it's harder for us to do things, something as simple as holding on. As an example, you know, if I had a pull-up bar in here and I had you hold on to that pull-up bar, how long could you hold your body weight there before your hands are just going to give out? That's those changes. That's localized in that particular situation, but those exertional factors dump chemicals into the blood that will affect everything in the system.
And you mentioned that doing something like push-ups or sit-ups is not the same as the ability to be in an all-out fight. Can you explain that a little more, and that distinction?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that I did is I did a bunch of exercise testing and prescription. I've tested thousands of people when it comes to exercise testing and prescription aspects. So the exercise tests measure different components of fitness. And I'm gonna take us, a lot of us, back to like high school. Y'all remember when we did like the sit and reach test and the 1.5 mile run or the push-ups? Those are all different components. Well, sit and reach is flexibility. A push-up is muscular endurance. Sit-up is muscular endurance. A 1.5 mile run is aerobic capacity. But a fight is anaerobic in nature, meaning oxygen is not providing a vital component actually in the fight. We can't get enough oxygen in. We've got too much other stuff going on. We don't switch over to oxygen as a major factor in burning things in an oxidative state until 3 to 4 minutes, 5 minutes into the event. It's all high intensity stuff. So this high intensity push that we do makes these changes occur, and because of the use of all these fuels, we have byproducts. And that burning sensation that you feel, the fact that I feel weakness or fatigue or tremors, that's all a aspect of the byproduct in the exertion.
And what happens if your body can't get enough oxygen?
Well, if you can't get enough oxygen from a total circumstance, the body dies. But oxygen itself in these type of situations can't produce enough energy to keep up with the physical demand. I talked about the different exercise testing. So a 1.5 mile run is aerobic. A 1.5 mile run doesn't give you any indication of your ability to fight. It just means you can run. The body functions on this thing called specificity, meaning if I want to get better at running, I have to go run. I don't swim. If I want to get better at lifting heavy weights, I have to lift heavy weights. If I want to get better at anything, I have to engage in that particular task. A run in an aerobic state, I'm not talking sprinting, a 1.5 mile run is an endurance issue. It's not a fighting issue. Those are two separate components. And there's a significant amount of research out there that these generalized fitness tests are great for fitness components. They are not indicative of measuring somebody's capacity to actually fight or to sustain anaerobic power. Anaerobic power is a completely different test.
And what type of power is your body using if you're in a fighting situation?
Anaerobic.
Okay, and that was kind of what you were describing, where it targets the large muscle groups? Or
Yeah,
how,
so
can you explain
big,
that?
it's not just the big muscle groups, it's the fact that the big muscle groups are having to generate high levels of force. So think about the difference between, if I'm running, a 1.5 miles, I don't have to produce a lot of force, I just have to do a lot of it, right? Multiple steps. But if you need to push your car out of the roadway, that's large muscle groups, right? That's anaerobic in nature, that's generating high amounts of force. You're not pushing your car 1.5 miles, right? Not happening, because it's not the same. The legs are moving, but it's not the same. One is generating high levels of force, the other is low levels of force just repetitively. So in an anaerobic state, I have to produce large amounts of force, and without getting into the recruitment of muscle fibers, I recruit certain type of powerful muscle fibers that will help with that, but they don't use oxygen very well, and they produce a lot of these byproducts very, very quickly.
And what does that do to someone's fatigue level?
It drives it up immediately. I mean, you can get people fatigued or gassed within 15, 30 seconds of a super high intensity exercise.
And what would be, if you're in a fighting situation, how quickly could that happen?
Same, depends on the nature of the fight.
And in this case, you reviewed the video, correct?
I reviewed a amalgamation of 3 different views in the video, yes.
And I know you just got here recently, but if I have Bob pull up Exhibit B, which is a sync transcript video. Can you please pull that up, Bob? And if we could dim the lights, please. Exhibit B. you say the compilation of videos, is this the compilation that you're talking about with the,
So far, it looks like it, yes.
okay.
Yes, that's it.
Okay. And would it, so I think as we're going through kind of what you explained, could you help walk us through the points where you first noticed that Officer Schurr is exerting energy, or exertion, I should say?
Sure.
And I guess, sorry, Bob, before you start, based on what you observed in the video, what physical exertion was Officer Schurr displaying throughout this interaction?
Well, there's a variety of things, everything from the knee strikes to the ability to try to control an individual to the, I believe there's at least one punch that's captured on the video. As already mentioned, there's large sections of the video that don't capture all of the action, so there's a lot of physical exertion that you can kind of hear and infer that there's stuff going on, but we don't know the extent of it because we can't see it on the video. But as an example, the holding on to something, we don't think of it being a lot of work, but it is a type of contraction. When we hold on to something, so there's three different types of muscle contractions. You have isometric, concentric, and eccentric. Without getting over the top, isometric means there's a contraction of the muscle, like me squeezing this rail, but my fingers aren't getting closer together. I'm developing force and my muscles are getting fatigued, but my hand's not closing, right? I can't. Well, if I have a load that's super heavy, I might be trying to squeeze it or trying to hold on to something. It's the same isometric contraction. It requires energy to do that, right? But it doesn't convey well on video because there's no movement associated with it, because the muscle doesn't shorten or lengthen, it contracts to hold on.
Okay, so it might be, would it be helpful for you to point out some points throughout the video where you notice that Officer Schurr is using physical exertion?
Yeah, well, physical exertion, as well as I mentioned at the very beginning, the concept of homeostasis, right? Where our body wants to be in balance. There are other things that can actually make it harder for us. If I start giving out a bunch of loud verbal commands over and over again, I'm interfering with my ability to breathe. Just imagine trying to shout your own name out 5 times in a row. What happens when you're done? Because I need to go back to homeostasis. So there's a lot of things that will actually play into the exertional component on this.
Okay, and what would be the first thing that you observed about Officer Schurr's conduct throughout this? Like, when was the first time that he would have been exerting some type of...
Well, the changes in breathing pattern happen when he gets onto the radio, when he grabs on, the chase that occurs as he's trying to make contact. All of that would be some level of exertion, or the starting point for it.
Okay. Bob, can you take us to RFN 3193, please? Okay, and what do you observe about this frame of the video?
He's making contact with the subject's shoulder. It's hard to say if there's any real squeeze. It doesn't appear, just the nature of the fold of the clothing. I can't say for certain, but this is the first contact where he's trying to gain control.
And at this point, what would be happening to his physical exertion levels?
Again, if there's not high levels of muscular force being used, not a lot, minuscule.
Okay. Bob, can you play the video from here, please?
Stop. Put your hands down. Stop.
Stop it there. And this is RFN 3555. And leading up to this point, can you tell us a little bit about some of the exertion that you noticed in Officer Schurr?
Yeah, the video in the top left-hand corner, you can actually see where he's starting to try to fight for limb control. Well, to do that means I have to generate force. To generate force, I'm starting to exert energy, I'm starting to exert effort. Video is problematic because it'll never serve as a proxy for the officer's experience. The same way that as you're sitting there looking as I'm squeezing onto this rail, you have no idea how much force I'm generating on this. But if I was to grab your forearm and squeeze as hard as I am here, you would know it. The officer feels those things. Video can't capture that. So that's one of the challenges in this, is we know there's exertion, we know holding on is exertion. To say how much work is done is a little bit harder to do. When he tries to control the limbs, that's exertion. I've got somebody that doesn't want their limb controlled. They're gonna pull away. To overcome that, I have to try to hold on. So that is all physical exertion. We're seeing a start of that effort early on.
And when would the start of that exertion begin? Would that have been?
As soon as the officer starts using force. I mean, and by force, I don't mean in a traditional use of force policy. I mean from a physics perspective, right? Talking about Newton, the whole concept of lifting up a water bottle, it requires force for me to lift up that water bottle. The muscles have to contract. This isn't a lot of force, not a lot of resistance. Give me 300 pounds, and that's going to be a lot of force. Give me somebody who's resisting against me aggressively, that's a lot of force.
Bob, can you play the video from here, please? And can you pause it there? Can you zoom in on the top dash cam video, please? Okay, and sorry, can you back up to 3555? Okay. Right. Okay, so we're at the point where Officer Schurr has tackled Mr. Leoya to the ground, and then I'll play it forward briefly, and then can you just, well, why don't you explain, once he tackles him to the ground, what type of physical exertion would Officer Schurr be using?
So, and I already mentioned the homeostasis component. When he gets on the radio, though, he's shouting out location and what he's got going. Remember I talked about the whole concept of if I shout my name a bunch of times, I get myself out of that homeostasis. It takes time to get back in. So that's a component that it plays into his performance. One of the other challenges you run into is the officer, as he's getting on the radio, maintaining control of that radio. In doing so, he effectively loses a limb that he can use to effectively actually control or grab on. I can't hold on to the radio and hold on to a person with that hand at the same time, meaning he's having to try to overcome and use additional force in other ways because he's tied up with the radio. And the radio is important. It's how he's going to get assistance, right? And there's no question on that. But that makes it even harder for him to control someone.
Okay, and Bob, can you play it forward here to 3806? Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Okay, if you could zoom in at that point, and this is RFN 3816. Okay, and at this point, what have you observed of Officer Schurr's exertion?
So he's trying to keep a subject who's fighting him on the ground, which requires physical force and physical effort. You see him change position at one point in time as he's trying to move position. That all requires physical force and exertion. All of that is going to require some level of force. And again, the piece that has to be taken into account is he's doing so wearing a vest and body armor, as well as his duty belt. So those all play into how much load he has to carry, as well as the challenges that you run into with the restriction that a vest can actually cause.
Okay, Bob, can you play it, please?
Okay. Stop! Stop! Get your hand behind your back, okay? Hands behind your back, okay?
Okay, can you pause it here? What is the RFN number? And during this segment, what did you notice about Officer Schurr's position?
Well, he attempts to do a couple of knee strikes. He engages in knee strikes. Knee strikes are very powerful, very high energy demand. Another challenge that you run into with the knee strikes, anytime I generate high levels of force, one of the things that we do is we engage in a process called bracing. So think about if you go to lift something up, you will literally tighten up your core to do it, so that way you can lift things up. The challenge is, and you want to do it along with me, if you tighten up your stomach and you try to breathe normal, it's not easy to do. So he has to generate high levels of force, but to set his core, to set those muscles, it actually can interfere with his breathing, which again can play into his ability to sustain a fight.
And up to this point, what have you noticed about Mr. Leoya's actions after Officer Schurr tackled him to the
So you hear
ground?
verbal commands that, or hear verbal statements that he's going to comply, but the actual physical actions are not compliance. Okay, after, the command, give me your hands, put your hands behind your back, but he doesn't do it. He continues to fight to keep the hands to the front. So there's a contradiction between the verbal statements that are made and the actual physical actions that are made. And you can see that Chris is trying to control those limbs, and he's not able to do a great job at it for whatever reason.
And you mentioned some of the knee strikes that Officer Schurr used. What did you notice about them?
Well, as I mentioned, the high intensity, that's the nature of a knee strike. They're big, powerful muscles, just because the muscles of the legs are, some of the largest muscles in the body. And in doing so, they have a very high energy demand. So we know that we start pushing that anaerobic threshold even more and more with that type of behavior.
Were they effective, the knee strikes?
They didn't appear to be effective because he's not getting compliance. He's not getting an individual who stops. You're not seeing an individual that ideally, if I do a knee strike to, say, the common peroneal, I cause a neurological effect on that muscle to where it doesn't contract very well. I'm not seeing that because he's, our subject's still able to get his legs up underneath him and at some point in time push himself up with Chris on his back.
And what would that indicate to you about their positioning?
So from a advantage perspective, he's underneath Chris. The fact that he's able to get his weight up, he's got a good solid base to fight from. I say that because, being able to fight from a bottom position is actually not hard to do. One of the simulations that I built that it's tied to national curriculum is specifically to the speed of a prone suspect and how quickly a prone suspect can turn around and actually utilize a weapon. So from the first movement to the actual use of a weapon, it can happen as little as 0.61 seconds. Now it's based on research that was done by Force Science, but I've put it into a simulator and I've had hundreds of people do it in real life, in real time, and it happens quickly.
Okay. Bob, could you please play this from here? And I'll... Okay, and I think this is what you were just talking about, but is this what you were talking about with Mr. Leoya doing a push-up?
Yeah, he's able to stand up with Chris on his back. It doesn't stop him.
And from what position was he in? And position was Mr. Leoya at the beginning?
Face down.
And once he was able to push up, was Officer Schurr in a position of tactical disadvantage?
When you see Chris's feet lift up at any point in time, he's at a position disadvantage because his center of gravity is actually not his own at that point. He doesn't own it. He doesn't have the ability to push off the ground because his feet aren't in contact. That's all problematic. The concept of, just because I'm on top, I'm in control is not necessarily the case because I've got to have good solid control over a limb, whether it's an arm, a leg, as well as a head. Otherwise, I have individuals that can stand up like we just saw, or spin.
And how long, or I guess how quickly is someone able to experience fatigue when they're in this type of dynamic fighting situation?
Yeah, I mean, a compromise with the breathing capability as well as high levels of physical exertion, you can get people fatigued within 15 seconds, 30 seconds. And within, your first 30 seconds to a minute of exertion, your physical ability to contract your muscles is already starting to compromise.
And are you aware that in this case, and I think you were here for the beginning or the end of Mr. McFarland's testimony, but that the fight here lasted for roughly 2 minutes and 28 seconds?
I am.
Okay, and within that, how would that affect Officer Schurr's ability to fight?
Well, the longer the fight goes, the more problematic it is, the more exhaustion and fatigue is going to play into it. The more of those chemicals are produced that actually inhibit our ability to hold on to stuff or contract our muscles effectively.
What are some of the factors that impact how quickly a person might feel fatigued?
Well, the demand of the activity is one of the bigger ones, right? How is it a high power activity like we're seeing here, or is it a lower power requirement? The difference between walking 5 miles, which might take us an hour and a half to do, versus something that I've got to do within seconds because I've got to generate high levels of energy or high levels of power, which require high energy demands. So the nature of the event itself, the load that is carried, the amount of work that transpires, how effective I can actually breathe. And breathe is not necessarily just the aspect of getting oxygen in, but being able to blow off carbon dioxide, right? That's one of the byproducts. I have to be able to do both. So my ability to breathe is compromised. That can factor into it. Those are all things that can play in.
And when Officer Schurr was on top of Mr. Loyola, was there anything that would be impacting Officer Schurr's ability to breathe based on their positioning?
Yeah, so 2 things of note. One, like I mentioned, the nature of the body armor because it can be restrictive as well as the gun belt. But the other problem is in that position, for every action there's an opposite but equal reaction. So the weight of the bottle sitting on the desk also pushes up against the bottle. It's just kind of the nature of things. So you see Chris's stomach actually sitting across the top of the hips, throughout some of the points in the video itself. Well, as that occurs, the body is actually pressed on. That makes it harder for me to breathe. Imagine laying over the edge of this ramp or on the edge of your couch with face down with it on your stomach, and now trying to actually inhale and exhale. It's all compromised.
And sorry, I realize we have RFN 4829 on the screen, but you're talking about a few frames prior to this when he's on the ground.
Well, there's a couple of portions. I mean, when they first go to the ground and then towards the end, so it happens more than once.
Bob, can you back the video up a little bit? And can you tell us what points you're talking about?
Sure. So we're starting to see this here, where he's over the top, and again, body position and the body underneath. The body underneath is going to press up against Chris. That's just the nature of physics. So you start to see that occur.
Sorry, for the record, this is RFN 4640. Okay. Bob, if you could play it forward, and then can you tell us when to stop when you see the next position?
If you're talking about the position where the respiration is now potentially compromised because of both individuals' body positions, that's going to be towards the end. But you've got molar strikes that occur between then, or between that event and this event. There's other physical exertion that's going on throughout this time frame.
Okay. So I probably am doing this the backwards way because I didn't have the RFN number. So I apologize. This is confusing. But would it be easier for you to explain this if we backed the video up? Or
you can continue from here. I mean, you do. I'll do whatever it is you need me to do.
okay, we can just go forward from here and then. Bob, if you could.
Take me out of your car. Okay.
You can hear Chris breathing. You can hear those deep inhalations and exhalations, right? That's a sign of exhaustion. We all have been in that circumstance. We've all felt that. We've all experienced that.
And what are some of the things that happen once your body starts breathing that hard? What does that indicate?
Well, it indicates a high, demand on the body itself, and the body's trying to compensate. Again, goes back to that big word, that homeostasis thing, the concept of going back to baseline, and needing to blow off all this carbon dioxide, all that CO2, as well as trying to get oxygen in that it can be used at a later time. But that's all indicative of the level of exertion that you're seeing. The bigger, the deeper the breaths, the more that you see that that expression of exhaustion, it gives you an indication of how much exertion was actually occurring.
And Bob, could we actually switch to, oh, and sorry, for the record, this is RFN 4,963. And this is the point once Mr. Leoya has gotten up and Officer Schurr is behind him. And if we could actually switch to Defendant's Exhibit C1, which is the cell phone video. And if you could play this to kind of where we were at, I don't know exactly where on this video, but if you could go. Okay, this is 26 seconds into Defendant's Exhibit C, RFN 4,953. And then if you could play the video forward from here.
Well, you can see Chris is trying to hold on to him, and there's physical exertion here. He's being pulled, number one, and he's having to try to resist it, but he's also in a position where he's trying to hold, the arms back.
And at this point, kind of, I know you were talking a little bit before about how the video shows something and how someone might feel. Can you explain that a little bit more in this position?
As far as muscle contraction,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, we can demonstrate it if you want.
Your Honor, permission to have Mr. Bartel step down from the witness stand to do a demonstration?
Okay, and what is he going to, is he just gonna reenact what's in the video?
No, Your Honor, I mean, the point is, muscle contractions, as we see on here, that isometric concept, anybody that's in the room, if they put their hands together and they push as hard as they can, as they're trying to collapse their hands, you're not gonna see on video that there's a lot of movement. But there is absolutely a ton of muscular contraction that's happening, and fatigue will start to set in. You'll feel it. So just because the video doesn't show an arm move, doesn't mean that the muscles aren't being used significantly.
I'm still, I don't know what demonstration you're gonna ask him to specifically do.
So just kind of to explain, and I guess we can go forward at this point.
He kind of did a little bit by pushing his hands together, I don't know if that.
Or if anybody wants to experience it, if you want the jury to experience it, they can do it. I mean, it's your call, Your Honor.
They can if they want to. I don't know that it's, I mean, they don't have to do it now, but unless they,
If they, I mean, I think if they want to, I don't know. I think what he's trying to say is just like how much force can
And how quickly
can
the
be
muscles are gonna
used,
fatigue.
and what that does to the body, even if you can't necessarily see it on the video.
I think he testified.
Okay, Your Honor. All right, so we'll move forward from here. Bob, can you play the video, please?
Stop, okay? Stop resisting.
No, you good now, resisting nothing, bro.
Okay, Bob, please stop it here. And this is 42 seconds into the Exhibit C1. And can you tell us what you've observed about Officer Schurr's body positioning and compared to Mr. Leoya's in this segment of the video?
Yeah, well, I mean, you see another knee strike, or, again, which doesn't have an effect on stopping any type of behavior. You see Chris, it appears that Chris is kind of getting pushed around. He's not directing the movement. It seems he's subject to the movement. which means he doesn't necessarily have the ability to physically overcome all of the resistance, which again, it appears that he's trying, but you know, as an example, you're seeing Chris spin backwards, which I don't think was necessarily an ideal position for him to do.
Why not?
But you don't know what you're going into when you go backwards. If you step back, you could trip all over things. It's kind of a concept of a tactical movement. Moving backwards without being able to see everything, your heel can catch something, it's problematic. Ideally, spinning into something is going to allow you to see the environment. I don't know if that's his choice. I don't know if that was a choice that he made, or if it was him, you know, being pushed into that position.
And that, when you say being pushed, would that be based on Mr. Leoya's actions? Or
Correct.
Okay. So as someone gets, what happens to someone's strength and coordination and reaction time as they fatigue?
It drops. It diminishes rapidly.
And in your experience, is this something that how does this impact, or how is it someone impacted as the duration of a struggle like this?
Well,
How is
the
that
longer the
impacted?
struggle, the longer I engage in high physical activity, the weaker I get. I mean, that's one of the reasons, you know, I get to teach across the country. Agencies are aware of this. They built it into their Graham factors, to their totality of circumstance. Exhaustion and fatigue is a primary consideration, because as this fight continues, my ability to sustain any type of fight, to hold on to somebody, to retain or regain control of it, it drops. The longer that fight goes on, the weaker I get, and that's a problem.
Okay. Bob, can you play this forward, please?
From RFN.
Oh, yeah. From RFN 5410.
Okay, why you gotta do all that, bro? He good, man.
Let go of the taser.
And could you stop here? We are at RFN 5992. And throughout, or sorry, can you move forward a little bit, Bob?
Let go of the taser.
No, like he good, like you can talk to him, bro.
And could you stop it here? We're at RFN 6480. And earlier you had mentioned there are things that you can hear and not necessarily see on the camera. And Mr. McFarland had previously stated that there's about 33 seconds of that. So what does that indicate to you about what might be going on during that time period?
There's unknowns. We can hear exertion, but we don't know how much other exertion occurred or what else Chris tried, because we can't see it on the video.
And does that have any effect on the total duration and the total exhaustion that Officer Schurr might have been feeling at the time?
Yeah, I mean, the more that you try and fail, the more problematic things are. It's clear that your intervention isn't working. Whatever you're doing isn't being effective. That narrows your choices down rapidly, and I don't have other options. So if I hit somebody with everything that I have and there's no effect, that becomes a major concern. What do I have left? That's not it.
Okay. And Bob, are you able to switch to Defendant's Exhibit C3, please? And this is the cell phone video. It's previously been admitted. And can you play this all the way through? Or I guess I'll take it in pause. And this is, okay, can you pause it right there? And this is Exhibit C3, RFN 7458. Mr. Bartel, can you tell us a little bit about Officer Schurr's body position?
Yeah,
here?
I mentioned earlier the concept of the hips being pressed up against the abdominal area, but just as concerning is both of Chris's feet are off the ground, meaning his center of gravity is not within his own control. He can get dumped, he can get swept. There's no way for him to generate any significant amount of power because he's not in control or in contact with the ground. You know, I realize that the purpose of this video or this section is specifically talking about the taser, but Chris's body position is indicative that he's in a bad position.
And why is that?
Because he can get swept or get dumped, whether it's left side or right side or even over the top. Again, standing up, grabbing that arm, ripping it down, all of that would end up with Chris on his back and in an even worse position.
And is there anything about the body positioning of Officer Schurr's hips or stomach at this point that would
Yeah,
impact
I
his
mentioned
ability?
the concept of the hips being, of Leoya being pressed up and potentially compromising his ability, Chris's ability to exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide.
And how does that impact his fatigue level?
It adds to it because I can't blow off what I need to with CO2. I can't suck in enough oxygen. That all plays into it, makes it even harder. Imagine, and I talk about the aspect of pushing a car. Imagine if I asked you to push that same car, but at the same time I restricted how much you could breathe. It's going to be harder.
And how does physical exhaustion affect a person's ability to continue controlling someone who has been resisting and fighting for roughly
Well, I
2.5?
mentioned that you rapidly see the muscle's ability to generate force, to hold on, to push things. It rapidly diminishes. So as I start getting exhausted, my ability to maintain force, to hold on, to punch something, to keep something in a position, it's affected really, really quickly. Some of the research says within the first minute, the force production decreases by almost 30%. That's a lot. That's a big change. And we're well beyond that 1 minute mark.
Bob, could you play this forward, please? Can you stop it here? All right, and this is RFN 7476. Can you explain the position that Officer Schurr is in at this point?
It's similar to the last one. He's not in an ideal position in any way, shape, or form. He's very easily could be swept, in other words, put on his back. He doesn't have his feet in contact with the ground, meaning there's no way for him to generate force or any significant amount of force. It's a horrible position for Chris to be in.
And is there anything about his location, or I guess the taser's location at this moment, that would potentially impact his exertion level or response to what's going on in this position?
Well, from mechanically, I don't think he's got the advantage based on the image. Mechanically, it looks like he's at a disadvantage. So depending on how much purchase, how much control there is on the device itself, it can dictate how much control or your ability to actually maintain control. If you don't have a lot of purchase, a lot of contact with the device, it might be very difficult for you to maintain control of it. And again, the fact that all of these muscles are starting to get fatigued, it makes it even harder because I can't generate the force necessary to hold on to things at the same level as I did 2 minutes and 20 some odd seconds ago.
Okay, Bob, can you play it forward, please? Stop it here. Okay, and this is RFN 7504. And at this point, can you talk about the body positioning of both Officer Schurr and Mr. Leoya?
Yeah, I mean, it's not an ideal position, obviously, for Chris. The challenge that we run into is his body is actually starting to slip underneath Leoya, meaning that once the control of the taser occurs, activation against Chris is really pretty easy. We're talking, and I realize it's a two-dimensional video and trying to represent three-dimensional space, but based on where their positions are, that taser device is very close to where his thigh is underneath the abdomen area of Leoya right now, meaning they're close. There's not a lot of movement needed.
Can you play it forward, Bob?
Pause it.
And it
Chris
says-
is having to place his hand where it is on that shoulder to brace him, to brace himself. Otherwise, he would have gone, highly likely, he would have flipped over. You see that hand position, brace. Chris has one leg completely in the air and was able to get that other foot on the ground once he braced.
And is this related to the center of gravity that you
Center
had
of
talked
gravity
about before?
concerns.
And how does that impact someone's ability or I guess their control and their
Well,
body
if
position?
somebody owns my center of gravity, they can sweep me, they can dump me, they can do a throw, they can roll on me. Ideally, I want to control somebody else's center of gravity. That's one of the best positions to be in a fight.
Okay.
And Chris doesn't have control of his own. He has to brace up like that, and that, where that hand starts to come down, and he's able to get that foot back on the ground.
And if he were in this position, what would happen if he didn't have his hand there? Or I guess in that position where he's leaning forward, what is his body position?
Without his hand braced, there's a probability, I can't say definitively because it's a two-dimensional image, that he could have fallen forward.
Okay. And here, what do you notice about Mr. Leoya's body position?
He's got a good stable base. His feet and his knees are in contact. One can contact, the other one start to elevate, which if I was to roll Chris, that's what I would have done. I'd have literally, that inside knee would come up and I would have rolled him backwards. But yeah, being in that downward position is a good position to be in. And I say that, like many people, I do jujitsu, but I also have COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, meaning I can't breathe as well as other people. I run with about a 65% lung capacity. I fight from the bottom position all the time because it's the laziest position to be in and requires the least amount of energy. So I love being on the bottom like that.
And do you feel that that's a position of tactical advantage?
There's an advantage with Chris not having ownership of his center and Leoya being in a downward position where he's got stability. There's an advantage to that.
And you had mentioned how quickly someone could turn earlier. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. So there's some research. It was the speed of the prone subject. What they did is they put people on a prone position, they videotaped them, and they showed how quickly somebody who had a firearm could turn and bring that firearm to bear and actually activate the trigger in a multitude of different positions, whether it's a chest up position, chest down left, chest down right, and they actually timed it. And I'm fairly familiar with it because I did a reenactment, which is what I put inside the simulator, that I've had a chance to run a few hundred people through. And what I see routinely, and consistent with the research, is from the first detected movement to the shot break by the subject that's on the ground can happen in about 0.61 seconds, which is quick.
Okay, Bob, could you finish playing this video, please? Okay, and this was the bystander cell phone video in slow motion. So Bob, could we have you pull up Defense Exhibit C2? Which is the cell phone video in real time. Could play that, please? And part of what you had mentioned was some of the speed that someone could turn. Is that related to like the action beats reaction concept?
No, I'm just talking about the ability for somebody to turn. I'm not talking about the individual that has to be able to perceive that turn, formulate a plan, and then carry out the action on top of it. That makes it even further behind the time curve. I'm just talking from the first movement to the shot break. That doesn't even account a human having to actually respond to it.
Okay. And how does physically, is there a point where fatigue can create a serious risk of losing control of the situation entirely?
Yes.
Can you explain when, how early or late, like when that
Yeah,
can
I mean,
happen?
everything from when physiologically we've got nothing left to give, to the fact that, as I mentioned a bunch of times, that as we start to get tired, our ability to hold on to something, to continue to fight, to produce force is diminished. Where our arms don't even want to, we can't even hold our arms up anymore because we're so tired. So all of that can play into it.
And how might exhaustion affect an officer's perception of the risk that they're in?
Well, the moment you start feeling all those effects of exhaustion and you start questioning internally whether you're going to make it through this fight or not, one of the problems that you run into is you don't become internally focused, so that your attention is on those effects that you're feeling, and you might miss things in the external environment, like somebody sneaking up on you or somebody else trying to help whoever you're fighting with. But that's one of the things that starts to occur. And the other is you realize you're losing the fight, and the options that you have, many of them are no longer viable. You have very few ways left to end this fight immediately before it gets worse.
And is it possible for someone to possibly appear like they're in control but be physically deteriorating internally?
Yeah, I mean, the signs and symptoms of fatigue, you have to be able to see effectively, but a cell phone video at low res from very far away, you don't necessarily see everything you need to. So somebody could be, showing more signs and symptoms of fatigue that a cell phone camera just can't really display.
And how does the recovery period usually indicate the intensity of a fight?
Well, conditioning has a part to do with it, but the longer it takes somebody to recover, that's indicative of how much energy expenditure and how much fight there was on the beginning. The harder we have to force ourselves through something and more exertion, more push, the longer it takes us to recover on the backside.
And Bob, I guess throughout, you've watched the whole video all together. After Officer Schurr, after the shot is fired, did you notice anything about Officer Schurr's exhaustion level?
Well, you can see signs and symptoms of exhaustion, there's no question. You see the big exhalation, you hear the breathing, you see the discoloration on his face. Those are all examples of where we start seeing exhaustion express itself.
And can you explain, like, when you see the breath, his breath come out, can you explain?
Yeah,
what
so there's that
could be
big
from?
deep breath, and I'm trying to get all that CO2 out, and that big huge inhale and then exhale, and the deep breathing that we've all experienced and we've all gone through as we're trying to recover. That's indicative of how intense the fight was.
And Bob, can you pull up Exhibit EE, please? No, EE. I don't think GG is still. And then can you go to the 29-second mark, please? Oh, 29 seconds. Sorry, can you back up a little bit? And then zoom in on Chris, who is in the upper right corner. Or sorry, this middle right of the screen. Sue, if you could dim the lights, please. Thank you. Okay, and then if you could play this forward for about 10 seconds.
On your knees. Put your hand.
And is there anything about Officer Schurr's demeanor at this point, which would have been over a minute or two after the shot was fired?
That indicate the exhaustion level?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely, even in, you know, the questionable video. So think about it, every other officer here has got both hands on a gun that they're pointing on individuals. Chris can't even hold up his left arm, it is literally straight down here, and he's holding the gun like this. That shows signs and symptoms of somebody who's excessively fatigued.
And what, is there anything about his breathing or his body position that would indicate his fatigue level?
If you can play it again, I wasn't seeing any rise and fall of his shoulders. One of the things that happens when we're breathing really deep is sometimes you actually use muscles of the upper back to help us breathe, to get bigger lungs. I wasn't paying attention to that, so maybe those are all signs that you start to see. I'm more looking at his posture, the discoloration that appears to be on his face, the fact that he's not holding onto his gun the way I absolutely know he's trained to do, because it's standard across the United States. That I've seen multiple times on officers that are absolutely exhausted.
And what would that indicate to you about the amount of energy and exertion that Officer Schurr had been using up to that point?
Yeah, back to my statement that I made earlier, those type of signs and symptoms of exhaustion give me an indication of how intense that fight was for Chris.
And once you get to a point of exhaustion, how does your exhaustion impact the risk to an officer once their taser has been taken from them?
Well, again, just the ability to maintain control of any weapon is problematic as I start getting fatigued. I lose my muscular control, my muscular coordination, the ability to hold on to things, to defend myself. Those are all problematic. Taser is just an example of one weapon that could be utilized or taken away from an officer.
And would an officer who is already exhausted be in greater danger once someone has control of a taser or other potentially deadly weapon?
Absolutely.
Why?
The inability to maintain effective fighting because of the exhaustion. The muscles can't do what they need to do to protect yourself.
And could Officer Schurr's fatigue level have affected his ability to use any other tools to try to control an individual?
Oh, absolutely.
Or would it also impact his ability to continue to fight or wrestle to try to get the taser back?
Yes.
At the point where if Officer Schurr had reached his full exhaustion level, is there any other viable tool that he could have used based on his position and extreme exhaustion once he lost control of his taser? Was there any other viable option for him at that point?
Well, so I guess the problem I run into with the question is, you said full exhaustion level. That means he can't do anything else. You can't get there. If you allow yourself to get to the point where you have nothing else that you can do, you can't lift your arms, and many of us have felt that, you can't do anything. There's no way for you to stop it. You have to engage prior to that event. You have to do something before you get to that point of exhaustion. Now the challenge is how fatigued somebody is. Are they able to do other things? I've got knee strikes that are ineffective. I got punches that are ineffective. To utilize a baton requires the ability to generate force with muscles that are already tired, and I need distance because a baton is a distance weapon. I don't have that. But in creating distance, I run the risk of separation and the device that he's taken away from me being used against me that much easier. So it's a very difficult position to be in.
And think about it, we can take this down. And based on all of the exertion that you saw Officer Schurr go throughout this entire thing, would it be reasonable for him to be in fear of being harmed or
They're asking to object, they're asking would it be reasonable for him? That's not the, you go over it, they keep on trying to do it.
I'm sorry, Your Honor, I'll rephrase the question. Would it be reasonable for an officer in a similar position that, after he had been fighting for over 2.5 minutes, when he was, after he'd been disarmed with his taser, after being outnumbered by other people that are there, would it be reasonable for an officer to be in fear of serious bodily injury or death?
Yes.
questions, Your Honor.
Break?
Yeah, I think we should, cause it's been about an hour and a half or so. So what we'll do is we'll take a break now, for 15 minutes, we'll come back, it's about 2:40, we'll come back at 10 minutes to 3. Anything to address before the jurors come back in? Since we're on defense case, I'll ask defense first.
We do not, anything to discuss? Thank you.
Mr. Booker?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, so we'll have the jurors come back in. Oh, good, the order. Okay. I'll just open. Welcome back, you may be seated. Proceed with your cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. First, I want to go into your report and a lot of what you rely on. Do you have a copy of your report?
I do.
I'd like to go to, can you go to your reference section? Your references. These are the materials that you relied on in preparing your opinion in this case, correct?
Correct.
The articles and, because you didn't do your own research, you relied on research of
Correct.
others. Okay. And in two of those, looking at the top, you have Armstrong, KA, and Gay. You see that one?
Correct.
That's respiratory function and exercise performance while wearing body armor. All right. Journal of Occupational Environmental Medicine, 58-2, pages 188 to 194. Correct.
Right.
You see, that's one of them. Mm-hmm. The other one was, looks like K. and Gay, E.W. Roberts and Cole, a 2019 study of the impact of body armor on exercise tolerance and respiratory function, and that was in the Medicine of Science in Sports and Exercise. Volume 51, Section 5, pages
Right.
987 to 995.
Right.
Those were articles you relied on for your research.
No, actually, those are misprints. The actual articles are Armstrong and Gay, 2016, the effects of flexible body armor on pulmonary function and ergonomics, and Armstrong et al., wearing body armor and backpack loads increases the likelihood of expiratory flow limitation and respiratory muscle fatigue during marching.
So you cited the wrong articles?
Yes.
So so the research, because when you go into those two sections, those articles don't exist, do they?
Yeah, they don't exist.
They don't exist. So the articles I took a look at aren't something that are available to us because you cited the wrong articles in your study.
Correct, except that I have an updated version that obviously you don't have.
That has been a trend here. So what I did find though is the International Journal of Exercise Science. Would that be a reputable journal that you would use?
Correct.
The Journal of Exercise Science did something, the influence of body armor on balance and movement quality.
Right.
Now, we're talking about body armor. All this, none of it is talking about police body armor. This is talking about military body armor.
Which is the exact same material.
The exact same material, but the body armor, according to this, once again, this article says, modern warriors combat load, the lightest average load for infantrymen is approximately 62 pounds. You're not saying that a Grand Rapids police officer is carrying 62 pounds of body armor around when he's doing this job, is
Yeah, but
are
you gotta put that in context. When you talk about the loadout, you're not talking about full mags that an officer or a military officer would have, not just the body armor itself. So the magazines themselves fully loaded.
We don't need to go in this. The full mags we were talking about is a infantryman is going to take about 62 pounds total.
Correct.
Mags, helmet, vest, boots, that, right?
Right.
That's not what a Grand Rapids police officer is going to have, right?
I don't know what their loadout is.
How do you're an expert here, right? You're getting paid like almost $250 to $300 an hour to know that, aren't you?
No.
You shouldn't, you prepare an opinion to figure out how much weight, you just talked about weight, how much weight an average vest and belt are for a Grand Rapids police officer?
No, I said average.
Yeah.
So average across the United States. I wasn't specific to Grand Rapids.
Well, should you
They
take a
could
look at
have-
what they are?
They could have plate carriers that are heavier, they could have plate carriers that are lighter.
And you don't know.
I don't.
You just relied on something regarding military body armor and trying to transcribe it into what a police officer has.
No, some of this material is actually on law enforcement as well.
Well, material, you keep on saying material, it's not material, I'm talking about the weight. The weight a Marine in Fallujah has on him is a heck of a lot more than what a Grand Rapids police officer.
But that's not body armor, that's the full loadout with magazines.
Full load.
That's full loadout with magazines.
Sure, but
That's not body armor.
but the
That's
total weight,
ammunition.
the total weight somebody's carrying around,
In your article, can I see it?
sure.
I'd love to add to my, yeah, so they're talking about combat loads and then talking about body armor. Where does it differentiate in the study?
It's talking about combat loads, exactly. When an
But
infantryman
they talk
goes
about
out,
both.
yeah.
They
but when
talk
you
about combat loadout and body armor, but what I'm looking for is where in here do they differentiate in the study?
But we're
Because what
talk-
they said is the average infantryman that's actually goes in a loadout, but not necessarily what was used in the study itself.
But an average infantryman going out into combat is gonna carry about 62 pounds, correct?
Right, but I don't know what
And
was
that's
used in
gonna
the
be-
study.
That's gonna be a lot different. A Grand Rapids police officer is not gonna carry 62 pounds,
Agreed.
okay? That's the point. But that's what your study was based on, or that's what your opinions were based on, at least military comparisons, correct?
On body armor, not necessarily the loadout of the ammunition.
So what about firefighters? Firefighters have to carry about 45 to 75 pounds when they go into a fire, don't they?
With an SCBA, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's, so they've got fires aren't usually done in 2 to 3 minutes, are they?
Not necessarily.
It depends. I mean, I'm not saying, but most fires, if you're going into a house fire, if you're going into a building fire, they've got to carry that around for more than 3 minutes, don't they?
Correct.
All right. They're able to function for longer than 3 minutes with that sort of load.
Yeah, but hold on, you're conflating somebody going into a structure that's on fire with having to exert high levels of physical exertion. Are you asking me, could a firefighter drag a body out for 3 minutes? No.
They've
There's
gotta
a
do
difference
lot.
between what you're setting in the firefighter world and what we're talking about with a law enforcement officer.
So, but carrying a body out or fighting a fire, those are high exertion type things, right?
Not necessarily. It depends on your role in as a firefighter.
Okay, but there's still, if a firefighter is going into a building, and they may have to carry a body out,
They might.
and so after 3 minutes, they're just gonna drop the body and keep going?
Or they get outside, and like many of the firefighters I've worked with have told me that they vomit because of how heavy they exerted themselves. So,
Sure.
Maybe.
But they're able to get outside, right?
Sure.
They just don't stop. I mean, that's a pretty big thing to carry a body out.
That's why they do buddy breathing and buddy rescues as well, because we do have issues where firefighters get stuck and their partner has to rescue them out of there.
But you still have to function. They function, they're able to function over 3 minutes as a firefighter with between 45 and 75 pounds, aren't they?
Function, yes.
Function, but they're not passing out. We don't have firefighters dying going into fires because they're passing out because they're too tired.
Well, that's actually not true. You can actually go to the firefighters, and no offense, we've got multiple firefighters that have had heart attacks inside of fires because of exertion and have died in the fire. So that's not an accurate statement.
Okay, I stand corrected then, but in terms of, on the average, that's not happening like every day then.
Not that I know of, no.
What about like MMA? MMA, they have five-minute rounds, don't they?
Depends on the event itself. Some of them are shorter than that.
Some of them are shorter, but you go pay-per-view, UFC, a lot of those are 5-minute rounds.
And they train for it.
And they train for it.
For years.
Sure.
They train for that.
But our police officers shouldn't train for years to be able to do that, to be able to fight and conduct themselves in a situation like that?
So, no, not trying to be flippant, but I've had the ability to train with a bunch of MMA guys.
Sure.
These guys will have 3 training sessions a day that last anywhere from 2 to 3 hours each. That's not what officers are afforded. So that's not exactly an honest comparison on an MMA fighter and what an officer has to do, and the preparation that's given.
Sure. Going into your history here, you work for Virtra?
Vertra.
Virtra is, like you said, you produce simulators for law enforcement training.
Correct. And military.
And military and law enforcement. So you work closely with law enforcement in trying to go into law enforcement agencies to get them to buy this equipment, right?
Oh, I don't buy anything. I build the content and the training curriculum. I don't have to worry about sales.
You don't have to worry about sales, but that's part of the thing, something that this Virtra's got to do to sell their equipment, to keep you employed to do the stuff, right?
Sure.
Okay. So a lot of what you do is go out and talk to law enforcement groups, right?
Correct.
You went out to the SHOT Show in 2025, right?
Correct.
The SHOT Show is a law enforcement, only for law enforcement and military, only people who are along those lines, not open to the general public, right?
Wrong.
It's wrong?
Yeah. So SHOT stands for Shooting, Hunting, Outdoor Trade Show. It's actually open up to anybody that might be law enforcement, military, mom and pop gun stores, camping stores, fishing supply, camping, all kinds of stuff. So no, that's not an accurate statement.
Okay. So, but like, can I go?
I could probably get you a pass.
Not asking to as a friend. Can I go just if I show up?
As of 3 years ago, you had to have something tied to that industry to be able to be allowed in.
Okay.
Prior to that, yes.
Okay. So now you got to be tied to an industry at least. It's not open to, nobody can just walk up and go as a member of the general public.
Correct.
You talked a lot about force science. Force science is Virtra, I'm sorry, it's hard to pronounce. It looks like Virtra. Virtra and force science are partners, if you will.
We do a lot of collaboration.
A lot of collaboration. You were co-sponsored this the SHOT Show.
Correct.
Okay. Force science. You talked about force science studies. Force science was started by a law enforcement officer, correct?
No, Force Science was started by Dr. Bill Lewinsky.
Dr. Bill Lewinsky, who's in the Law Enforcement Hall of Fame, correct?
Correct, but not as an officer, but as a researcher.
As a trainer, as a researcher.
researcher.
Okay. You're one of the 19 instructors by Force Science. You're on their website as an instructor,
Correct, I'm an adjunct instructor.
adjunct instructor, because you're not full-time.
Correct.
Okay. As a full-time instructor, they have 5 full-time instructors, correct?
Correct.
And those are all retired police officers.
No, some of them are active officers.
Some are active, okay? Some are active, retired, but they're all police officers.
Correct.
12 out of the 19.
Well, maybe not. I'd have to have the list. There might be a couple that are PhDs, so I'd have to have the list on those 5. I apologize.
But 12 of the 19 instructors are police officers or attached to police departments, aren't they?
Potentially.
You don't know?
Off the top of my head, no.
But a part of what they do is also go out and sell their Force Science certification course, correct?
They provide the Force Science certification course.
They provide it.
They don't have to try to sell it because people come to them.
Sure, they come to them at $1,600 a pop, right?
Yeah, and you have Dr. Christine Hall and Dr. Lewinsky and all these other very high-end researchers providing knowledge that's worth a lot to folks.
Sure, it's worth a lot. Part of your history is you're the former union president of the Peoria Police Officers Association, correct?
Correct.
Some of your publications, well, some, just about all of them. Oh, so the Police Journal is one of the things you publish in?
Correct.
Phoenix Law Enforcement Association, you had a published thing there.
Probably.
Police Officer Executive Research Forum, you published there.
Correct.
Police One,
Correct.
and that's where I got your bio in terms of your Police One bio, that's where it comes from. Like listed, nice picture, it looks exactly the same, but that's where I got, you work closely with law enforcement. You got a listing on their website for the articles you published on Police One.
Probably.
Fair statement?
Probably, yes.
The Law Enforcement Executive Forum, you've done that.
Correct.
The Police Journal.
Correct.
So your audience is primarily police officers, aren't they?
Police leaders
Police leaders.
and police trainers.
Well, some of your articles you've posted on LinkedIn, haven't you?
Correct.
Now you're familiar with this one, Police Use of Force, an Officer's Perspective.
Correct.
That's your article that you wrote that.
Correct.
And it's a little while ago, 2016 it came out.
Correct.
In that you wrote, for full transparency, I want to disclose a few points. I am a police officer and have been for almost 19 years. That does shape my view and influence my perspective on these incidents.
Correct.
So you're influenced by your history as a police officer when you review a use of force incident.
We're all shaped by our history.
Sure, no problem. The other one is you have a LinkedIn post, to stop the madness of random violence. You recall that one?
Correct.
This is your article 2, a little bit earlier, 2014. In that you wrote, I'm going to tell you a dirty little secret. The only way to immediately stop violence is with overwhelming violence. You agree with that?
I do.
And I will tip my hat to the phrase, God made man and Samuel Colt made all men equal. You smile about that one.
That's pretty funny, actually.
Yeah, but that's how you feel.
That phrase was out there,
Yeah.
yes, because what it means is people of smaller stature are able to defend themselves against individuals much larger than they are.
Because of a gun. Mm-hmm. Okay. I have nothing further.
I just have one follow-up question for you. You were asked some questions about the load of duty belts and everything that Officer Schurr potentially would be wearing or others. Would an additional 20 to 25 pounds change your opinion in this case at all?
No, it just makes it harder. It's magnified. The bigger the load, the more intense everything is, the faster, you're adding load to the body. The more I ask you to carry, the harder it is for you to do.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Okay, I just see at least one hand on the jury, so I'll ask my clerk to come and grab that question. If you could approach Ms. Hamilton to
In one of the video clips, you stated that the subject was resisting aggressively, quote, resisting aggressively. Does this differ from the actual sole act of aggression? And are there different exertions expelled between those two?
One more time, Your Honor, I apologize.
In one of the video clips, and if you don't understand the question, that's fine, you can just.
I'm doing my best.
But, okay, in one of the video clips, you stated that the subject was, quote, resisting aggressively, unquote, does this differ from the actual sole act of aggression? Are there different exertions expelled between the two?
I think I understand the question as, because I've seen the policy on use of force, and they specifically call out the concept of active aggression, which is, I think, the phrase that's used in there. So active aggression is a fairly common phrase that's used across law enforcement, and what that means is actual acts of assault. In other words, an individual who's trying to punch you, elbow strike you, headbutt you, bite you, kick you, those kind of things. That's active aggression. That's one type of resistance. Other types of resistance can be what's called defensive resistance, and it can still be done aggressively. That means if I grab onto your arm and you rip your arm away from me, that's aggressively ripping your arm away. But they're not necessarily the exact same thing. So active aggression is it's consistent with the policy I've seen. That's a level of assault, versus defensive resistance is resisting arrest, no question, and it can be done very aggressively, but it's not necessarily directly focused to harm the officer. They both require a lot of energy to overcome. They both require a lot of effort. You know, the idea of, as an example, you know, if I grab somebody's arms and I'm trying to keep them pinned and they, you know, break away, that's a lot of energy and effort to do. And to overcome that, I have to generate a lot of force. I think I answered the question.
And any follow-up from that, Ms. Hamilton?
Not this time, Your Honor.
Mr. Becker?
There you are.
I don't see any other hands raised. May this witness be excused?
Your Honor, was there one more question on this? Okay. There's one more question.
I asked it,
Oh,
and he answered it.
okay. Then no.
Yeah, there were two on the paper. I just asked them all together, and he did answer. So may he be excused? Ms. Hamilton? Can you
Yes,
be
Your Honor.
excused? Okay. Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Honor.